Welcome to the Cisco TelePresence VCS System Configuration Video Guide. My name is Michael McGarry, a Product Manager within the Cisco TelePresence Systems Business Unit. This is the last of 6 videos which will guide you through the basic configuration of VCS. Welcome to Part 5, Status. We've actually been beginning every one of these sections with the Status Overview page. This gives us some information on the resource usage, high watermark being peak, as well as the uptime and software version. If we continue on through, we can go to System and Information. This gives us a little bit more information about the software build that we're running on the VCS. Underneath Ethernet, we can see the current speed and duplex of this particular Ethernet interface that we have plugged in, as well as the MAC address. Underneath IP, we should of course obviously see the IP addresses here that's configured on this particular VCS, as well as DNS settings. Underneath registrations, we can see all of the devices that are registered, including a application conference factory that we configured earlier for multiway at cisco.com. In this case, we see that it is registered with 127.0.0.1, which is the local loopback interface. We also see a couple other endpoints registered. If we go into a specific registration, this happens to be H.323. We also see that this particular endpoint is registered via the RFC 1918 address space. And we also see each of the different types of aliases that are registered. H.323 registrations can contain multiple aliases in the same registration. SIP, though, can only contain one registration per SIP UA or user. We can unregister this device. However, if we unregister because this device is going to try to attempt to re-register, it will immediately re-register. But this may be also a way that we can actually clear this registration and get a refresh of that particular registration. Of course, as soon as I unregistered, it re-registered almost immediately, and so therefore we already have it back being registered. So if I click on it, it actually already has it registered, and we see that the creation time for this registration is actually just a moment ago. So it was 8:34 and 52 seconds, and it's now 8:35 Pacific time. If we want to, we can go to calls, and this actually lists out calls. And of course, we don't have any calls at the moment, so I'm going to actually tell one of the endpoints that's registered to this VCS to make a call to a traversal server, and we're going to actually make a call all the way back to my home office endpoint. And I'm going to click dial, and we should now have an inbound call to my endpoint, and I do hear it ringing, and I'm going to go ahead and accept the call, and I'm going to take and refresh this page, and we do see the call as a start time of right now, and I see a source and a destination. Now remember, we actually had configured the bandwidth limitations, and we told the bandwidth limitations between this particular VCS and the TSBU Alpha VCS was set for no greater than 384 kilobits per second. Therefore, that's what we actually see in the configuration here. If we looked at this particular call, we can see a little bit more information about this particular call. We actually can see the call signaling addresses of each of these devices, as well as the source alias and the target alias that we dialed. In this case, we dialed michael.mcgarry.external@tamberg.com, which is an H.323 ID. We can get some additional information as well about this particular call. If we view all details of this call, we actually can see all the different types of informations. We actually have different types of legs of this particular call, as well as we have the session. This is not a media routed call, therefore we know that we didn't interwork the call, or it was not a firewall traversal directly from this particular VCS, so therefore we have false here. It is call routed mode, even though we have optimal set, because the endpoint that we're making the call from is registered to this actual VCS. We also see the route that that particular call made. This is from the subzone of RFC 1918 that we created via the subzone 1 to default subzone link that gets automatically created, to the default subzone, which is on the box, and then we see a route to using the link of zone 01 to the default subzone, and here we have the external VCS, or the far end neighbored VCS of the TSPU alpha VCS. And that's the actual route that this VCS understood that that call actually had within the VCS itself. And again, this is a routing links. If I were to take and make a modification to my bandwidth configurations, and I go back over to my pipes and I say that I want to allow 768 kilobits on this particular link, that might not be advisable if it was just a T1, but we know that it's a little bit larger than that. So I'm going to do a little bit of changes here with bandwidth restriction on the total as well as the call. So now that I've set 768K, I'm going to go ahead and save that. And I'm going to tell the endpoint to disconnect the call. So the endpoint now has disconnected the call. And if I go back to status calls, now I do not have a call in. Let's go ahead and make another call. And we're just going to tell the device to make another dialed call to the same endpoint. And I've got the inbound call, and I'm going to go ahead and accept that call. And I'm going to refresh the call status page. And now we see 768K as the allocated bandwidth because we're allowing that call to happen that way. We also see another column here, peer. This actually call status page contains all of the cluster of VCSs and all the calls within the cluster. But it also tells us which peer member in the cluster that that particular call is occurring on. Since we only have one member in this particular cluster, we see it being the peer 1 address. If we click on that particular link, it actually tells us that we're going to filter just the calls on that particular peer. Again, we can look at the view actions here and see that call again, and we see that it was requested at 768K and we allocated 768K for this particular call. All right, let's go on. We have a search history. Search history is very important. It allows us to understand how calls are occurring and where dialed events are occurring. And in this particular case, I actually see that we have a admission request, and this is our admission request as well as the call setup message. And if we go on into that particular search history, we can actually see that particular call and how it actually occurred. Obviously, this routed through that TSPU alpha VCS, and it used the rule, the search rule of TSPU alpha any alias. Let's go on to the local zone configurations, or the local zone status. This tells us that we actually have the default subzone where we have one device registered. The default subzone obviously did not contain 127.0.0.1, therefore the default subzone has one registration, and that particular registration is the multiway at Cisco.com. We see two registrations from RFC 1918. Now, since RFC 1918 is a subzone, and we see one call going on, we also know that it has to route through the default subzone in order to be able to get to the remote zone. And in that case, we see that there is one call in each one of these subzones. The default subzone, again, is the default subzone on the box. So it would actually have all of the calls. If we looked at zones, we actually have all the zones that are configured. So we do have the default zone on this box. However, it does not contain a call because of the fact that we're going through the default subzone directly to the neighbored zone. And in this case, this is why we see a one call to the neighbored zone. We also see the fact that these two are actually active. So we do have actual H.323 application level connectivity as well as SIP application level connectivity to this remote VCS. If we looked at bandwidth, we can actually look at those links that we talked about earlier. In each one of these links, you can actually see where we have a link from zone 1 to the default subzone, and it's actually consuming one call at 768K. If we looked at the pipes, these are the consumable pipes, and we obviously see one pipe here, which is that T1 from RCDN to San Jose that we configured, and we see that it's consuming one call and a total of 768 kilobits per second. If we click on that, it actually goes directly to the link that jumps to the edit pipe information, and we see the status again down at the bottom, as well as this particular pipe is being used in 2 different links. If we go back to system status and we go to policy services, this is if we're using a remote policy server. We'll actually see the status of that particular remote server. That's more of an advanced configuration, so we're not going to go through that for this particular exercise. However, let's go to applications, and we're going to look at publishers. And we will actually be able to see the fact that we actually have 2 different URIs registered here. We have the Conference Factory URI listed, and that is a publisher, so it's actually publishing presence on behalf of it because it does have an @cisco.com, as well as we see anthony.lou.office@cisco.com. Now, if you notice over here, we actually see 2 publishers. That's actually because of the fact that we have the presence user agent that is creating a presence for the H.323 based endpoint, as well as the endpoint natively has the capability of supporting presence for the SIP URI that it's registering as well. So it's actually publishing presence, so therefore we see 2 publishers for that particular URI. If we looked under subscribers, if we had any subscribers looking at the presence for those particular endpoints, then we would actually see that showing up here. We don't have any subscribers for that particular endpoint or any particular endpoints, and we don't see anything. Excuse me, we don't see anything. We do have a warnings page, and earlier we had clicked on that red triangle with an exclamation point, and we actually went to this page and we basically acknowledged all of these different errors. Now, these particular errors are not a real problem, other than the fact that we probably want to make a change from the default passwords. This particular box is currently using default passwords, so that's why it's alerting us. We can go to the hardware as well, and the hardware shows what each of the fans are on the box and the speed, as well as we have different temperature sensors on the box, and we also have different measurements for each of the different voltages being supplied by the power supply. We have some minimum and maximum thresholds here, and if these exceed the minimum and maximum thresholds, then what will end up happening is that we'll show up as a warning event, and it will also send that information to TMS if this VCS is in TMS. We also can look down at the logs. We have an event log and a configuration log. If we looked at the event log, this is where we see all the different types of calls that are occurring or have occurred in the past, and also all the different searches. We currently have the log settings set for 1, so we are looking at basic information. If we turned this particular log level to 4, then we would see a significant amount more verbose information in the event log. Of course, in the related tasks, we can go to view the event log directly, and it will jump us directly into the event log. If I disconnected this particular call that we actually are in and reconnected it, we would see a significant amount more information being displayed. All right, I think that this is pretty much it. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to send me an email. That's mmcgary@cisco.com. And thank you so much for participating and understanding a little bit more about the VCS and its configurations. Thanks, and have a great day.